Hey everybody, welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. This is Pastor Megan at Grace Lutheran in San Francisco, and our website for the church is www.gracesf.com. We worship every Sunday live, online and in person, and you can go to the website for the live stream, or you can watch past services on YouTube, or if you look up Megan Rohrer on iTunes, you can get just the audio and listen in podcast form of our worship services, of this Bible study that doesn't suck. Yes, I've figured out how to do that now. And when I remember and don't lose my phone during service of just the sermon. So those are all on iTunes now. And this is the part of the year where pastors start to go a little crazy and get a little spacey. So I get to go on vacation next week for a little bit of a while to come back to my Christmas senses. But this is Bible study that doesn't suck before I get that relief. We also have...
Hello, I'm Pastor Amanda Zentz. I serve at Central Lutheran Church in Portland, Oregon, and I have a very excited dog behind me. Hold on.
The exterminator is at Amanda's house, and all the animals rejoice.
So, she's a very good dog who's very excited to see people. Our worship service is on Sunday at 10:15 in the morning in Northeast Portland on the corner of 21st and Schuyler, right off of Broadway. We would love to have you come and join us. And you can learn more about Central at www.centralportland.org. This is Annabelle. She is here with us today because I didn't get to see her yesterday. So she is hanging out with me on my shoulder while I'm here this morning. So, welcome to my cacophony.
It's like a little menagerie. So normally what we do on Bible Study That Doesn't Suck is we go through each of the readings that might probably appear at your congregation and be read by folk from the pulpit, and probably your pastor will talk about it. This week, we're going to do kind of a speed run through the particulars of the text because the overarching theme for this Sunday, not a title picked by me, is called The Reign of Christ. If that makes you mad or you think that's weird, just hold off. We're going to do our talk about the individual texts, and then we're going to get to what the heck is the reign of Christ? Why do we call it that? And should we ever call that again in the future? Okay? So, for the Old Testament readings, the part that is in Hebrew, there are two choices for this week. One is 2 Samuel, and if you watched last week's Bible Study That Doesn't Suck or listened to it, then you know that Pastor Amanda and I made different choices about whether or not we were having readings from 2 Samuel or from Daniel. I think God made the choice, though, this week, because with all of the terrorist attacks that were happening in Paris and Beirut and in Syria and all over our crazy world, it became pretty clear that on Sunday, most congregations were going to need to talk about that, and the Daniel text was a little bit more suited to that because it was a text about the whole world being destroyed. The Samuel text is about telling the story of Samuel. Last week's reading was about how much Hannah, Samuel's mother, really longed for Samuel to be born, and as a part of that process, Hannah did what people do in desperate situations or in vulnerable situations and made promises to God. If you save me, I will do whatever you want. If you get me out of this mess that is really stressful, I will behave for the rest of my life. And Hannah's promise was, if you help me to have a baby, even though that's not possible for my body, I will dedicate this child to you and they will do everything you want and be amazing. So we are in the part of the story, a complete whole chapter later. So a lot has transpired. Samuel has ruined that promise because he falls in love in the ways that are imperfect that many of us experience. His hair was cut off. His this promise to God was broken. And so this is a story of brokenness. It's a story of things not going the way you would want them to. And it parallels a lot the Christmas story that we'll be reading soon. So the reading from Samuel starts off, and you think it's going to be touchy-feely, lovey-dovey, happy-clappy, and takes a turn. Right? So it starts by saying, these are the final words of David. Right? And I would want my final words to be like something wise, like, you will know that I was here because I loved the world, or something like that. Martin Luther had his final words were left on a piece of paper next to his deathbed, and on the piece of paper of his writings, it was said that Martin Luther's last words was, "We are all beggars." Right? And so there's kind of this connotation that we should care for the homeless, we should care for the poor, and that we are all equal in the eyes of God because we all have to beg God to love and care for us. And Luther's insight and breakthrough was that he believed that God grants us that through baptism and through grace. David's last words start kind of nice. The Lord speaks through me. God loves people. It will be just. Ooh, it's pretty like the sun rising on a cloudless morning and gleaming from the rain on the glassy land. Isn't it amazing? And then 3 verses of crap. It turns into, oh, and all those people who don't follow the rules, they're going to be thrown away and burnt to death because they're thorns. And you don't pick up thorns with your hands because it pricks you. Nanner, poo-poo, nanner. Bad people get it. Right? And so this is the final deathbed words of someone who is trying to assure people that God is on their side, and and who maybe should have stopped talking after that part, right? Because at the end of a good action movie, the hero can leave at the end, right? They've conquered whatever horrible thing happened, whether it was a gigantic dinosaur storming through the city, a gigantic monster holding onto a beautiful girl, or like robots that have come to kill everything. There's always a point in the movie when the hero gets a cool catchphrase. And the catchphrase is either something like, "We always had what we needed inside of us." That's Wizard of Oz. It's not really an action movie, but during its day it was. Okay, right? So like you can have a catchphrase that's touchy-feely, lovey. Ooh, humans are amazing. Hug your baby scene, credits. Or
Lindsay.
That's right. Yeah, a My Little Pony ending. Or
Dr.
the hero.
Who. Technically, it's
Sorry.
a hooves pony.
It's a Who pony.
Yeah.
I would never know that. I'm too
Alonzi is Doctor Who.
Or the hero goes out with like guns shooting in the air, and they say something nice to their wife that they finally get to reunite with, and then they're like, "Suck it," to the aliens or whatever they killed, and then they leave because they're like, "Meh, you are all dead and I'm amazing." 2 Samuel didn't know when to shut up, right? If he would have ended, I prefer my movies to end with the Hallmark version where everyone cries and then there's the kiss, like the Disney ending, not the ha ha ha, I'm victorious. So that's how I feel about the 2 Samuel text. The end.
The end.
Pastor Amanda, do you have more to say about that, or do you want to be on our quick jog towards Daniel so we can get to the reign of Christ stuff?
Let's keep quick jogging, jog. Especially with my dog being so excited this morning.
Wonkadoodle. Daniel.
So the thing about Daniel that I found really interesting, I was listening to the Working Preacher podcast, which we can put a link to down here. If you are watching on the YouTube video, you can click that and find out what I'm talking about. And that's a podcast that comes out of Luther Seminary, because this Sunday is actually sometimes really difficult to preach on. So I was trying to gather as many resources as I can. And the interesting piece that was said on the podcast this week was information that, you know, the book of Daniel as a type of writing, it's a type of writing of a highly oppressed people So if you think about people who really don't have a lot of rights, really whose rights are ignored, who are perhaps just don't have much in the way of worldly goods and things that they need. Sometimes those folks tend to get pretty upset with that situation, and they start talking about things to change the world, and they start fighting to change the world. And the book of Daniel is not to be read by people who are in positions of authority, positions of power, positions of majority. And we can read it, obviously. And when we do, keeping in mind that this was written by an exceedingly oppressed people, written as a kind of polemic writing to incite action and to bring people to do something. So an example, a friend of Pastor Megan and I posted, I believe posted this morning, something from folks who blocked the interstate in the Midwest. And it was a writing about that, saying, you know, for those who took to the streets and blocked the interstate because they were angry and they are oppressed and they are tired and they are frustrated by the oppression that they experience, they slowed people down for 1, maybe 2 hours out of their life. And the folks who were doing that are folks who face that kind of oppression and face that kind of situation every day of their lives, all day long. Mm-hmm. And so when we read the book of Daniel, when we read this kind of apocalyptic literature, which is what it's called, apocalyptic literature, which does not mean that it's talking about a time to come. It's talking about literature that calls us to change the world and turn it upside down and make it different and make it better and make it more just. When those of us in majority privilege read this, we might think of it as a way to justify our actions of keeping other people oppressed. But the entire point of this genre of literature is the exact opposite of that. It is to encourage those who are oppressed to speak up, to use their voice, to call for a change. So whenever you read the book of Daniel or when you read the book of Revelation,
Bless you.
Thank you.
That was really good muting.
Did you like that muting?
Those just listening to the audio, Amanda sneezed, but she muted herself.
It was pretty quick on the mute finger there. So for those of us reading the Daniel or Revelation, it's just important that we keep in mind the type of genre. It's like if you were reading a mystery book, but you expected it to be like high dollar store quality romance. You're gonna be like searching for the romance scenes, but it's a mystery novel, and you're not gonna find the right thing, and you're not gonna enjoy the book for what it is, and you're gonna misread all the clues, and it's just gonna be really wonky. Or if you're reading like the dollar store corset ripper romance, and you're expecting it to be a high quality literature novel, and you're like, what is this trash? Like you need to read the genre as the genre.
Yeah. Well, and if you're looking for a podcast to listen to, and you're not going to preach on this, and you want a podcast that's going to give you a similar feel of the writing of what Daniel was up to, I really want to highly recommend a podcast called Theology Live, and it's produced by Broderick Greer, who's a pastor in Memphis, Tennessee. He's a gay African-American pastor who is very, very prolific on Twitter, and the particular podcast that I'm thinking of is the latest issue of this podcast is on the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's about a seminary professor who was a part of the activism in Ferguson, and who uses some of the writings of James Cone, who's an African-American liberation theology writer and process theologian who believes that theology is racist, and particularly our conversations about the cross can be very racist. He has a prolific book called The Cross and the Hanging Tree, I believe is what, or the Lynching Tree, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. And I'll put a link to that. If you're at justlutheran.blogspot.com, you can find all of the links. And so if you are interested in one of the contemporary ways that people of faith all over the country have been using the work that they do to live in a community where they're feeling very unjust. If you're only seeing on the news the like Black Lives Matter people who, storm pulpits and demand from politicians that they get things their way, you only see the stereotype, the prejudice of angry Black people being played out in social media. And this podcast gives a really great behind the scenes conversation about the people who are connecting their spirituality to their work in that movement. And for example, did you know that Black Lives Matter goes to the funerals of police officers and provides pastoral care to the families of fallen police officers? And that part of the work that they're doing is trying to be community in a new way. And there's groups of pastors who are trying to be a part of that community, try to support the community, and to affirm that this work of being community when you feel like you are oppressed is theology and is church. And so it's a very fascinating podcast. I'd be surprised if anyone listened to it and felt like they had wasted their hour. And if you want to listen to the podcast in the manner of which it is recorded, I believe that the Theology Live is recorded at a pub on whiskey night. So there you go.
And I would have to say that perhaps the most supportive environment that I have been in for our police officers is when I have attended a meeting at the East Precinct here in Portland, Oregon, and it was an amazing dinner of this room filled with the African American pastors within the area and myself. I sat down and shut up, and the high-ranking officers of the East Precinct, and the prayers for the public servants were amazing, and the concern on both sides of the room for the increasing levels of violence for both parties, both the youth of the African American community, as well as our servants in blue, and just being aware of the increased tension that's happening right now. And the leaders of the community, the elders, some of whom in this room were literally at the Pettus Bridge, right? Who walked with Martin Luther and Martin Luther King, for those who are wondering. They were there, and they just poured out these astonishingly stunning, beautiful, humbling prayers. So I think that sometimes we get some really bad press about the movement and what's happening. And sometimes it's honest press, and that's okay too, because people get to be angry about what's going on in our world. So I want to say that too. But yeah, it's impressive stuff. So shall we move on to Revelation, since we're kind of still talking apocalyptic literature?
I suppose, but can I just really quickly say that I love the Psalm 132 choice, because I know it might not be everyone's favorite, because I also like Psalm 93. But I just want to read really quick, because I love feeding the homeless. This is my resting place forever. Here I will reside, for I have desired it. I will abundantly bless its providers. I will satisfy its poor with bread. Its priests I will clothe with salvation, and its faithful will shout for joy. I could use a little bit of that. Just saying.
It's some good stuff, isn't it? That reading. That psalm is paired up with the 2 Samuel reading about David.
Yeah.
And the psalm that's paired up with the Daniel reading is Psalm 93, which is, I think, very much close to like my top 1 or 2 psalms. So this is what's called an enthronement psalm. It's a psalm that talks about God being the ruler at the end of the day. And I think for myself, when I see like all the stuff happening in our world, like let's look at last week alone, right? Like when I look at all the stuff that's happening in the world, I get so tired and so frustrated and so overwhelmed by the negative stuff in the world and feel so powerless over it. And when I discovered the enthronement psalms in seminary, it was actually in the spring. So it was February of 2002. So just prior to that was September 11th, 2001. So I took my Psalms class the following spring and read the enthronement psalms for the first time. And so in the midst of everything that was happening after 9/11, where we had this point in time where it really looked like people were going to reach for peace, and instead we reached for war. And now we have an entire generation of teenagers who've known nothing but war in their lifetime. And I might have some feelings about that. So I was reading these enthronement psalms, and Psalm 93 was one of them that really hit me, because it's this promise, it's this declaration that at the end of the day, at the end of this world, God is the one who's in charge. Now, whether you use the word king or whether you use ruler, right, those words are heavy laden with patriarchal history now. But if I could step myself away from that and just saying that at the end of the day, God is the one who's in charge and not human beings who are so messed up and who tend to just constantly fall back into fear and fall back into hatred of those they don't know and fall back into closing doors and setting up walls and all of those things, if I can lean back and rest on the throne of God and trust that somehow, some way, someday, God is going to make this stuff right. And this image, this promise that God is the one in charge, God has strength, God established the world, God's throne is from everlasting. And then this whole image of the next 3 verses where the entire world and creation recognizes that God is the one who's really in charge. So for those of us who are passionate and care for creation and issues of what we're doing to our world and how we're destroying our world, this is another place to find that comfort, to say, at the end of the day, somehow, some way, when the kingdom comes, all of creation will be rejoicing. The floods will lift up. The floods have lifted up their voice. They lift up their roaring, and more majestic than the thunders of these mighty waters, how majestic is our God. And it's just beautiful. So the enthronement psalms run, there are several of them in the 90s, the numbers in the psalms, there are several of them there in the 90s. So you can look through those. And if you, like myself, sometimes feel like human beings do nothing but frankly F it up in our world, that it would be...
I've never felt that way. Never.
That I find great comfort in the enthronement psalms.
And that attitude really comes out in the Revelation text as well. And an imagination, perhaps a dream, but certainly an allegory about what the end of times will be like. And this is the beginning of it, to establish at every point that no matter how dark and dreary it gets, God's going to be there. God's going to be there in the Alpha, and God's going to be there in the Omega. If you've ever been to a church that has an A and then an O, that's what it means, that God is the beginning and God is the end. And sometimes in our best, we live that out in our congregations, and sometimes we know the person we have to ask before we do something, because that's the one who's the Alpha and Omega of the congregation. Not my congregation, other congregations.
And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Greek alphabet, what that is Alpha is the first letter like our A, and Omega is the last letter like our Z. So from A to Z, from Alpha to Omega, from all that was at the beginning and all that will be at the end.
My problem, though, is that because the book of Revelations has been so deeply claimed by jerky people and Kirk Cameron movies, nothing against Kirk Cameron, but the movies that he is in that are about the Book of Revelations are used to scare the bejeezers out of people and try to get them to behave and follow a certain set of rules that community has come up with and has decided, if my way or the highway, follow these rules or you can't be a Christian. And I want to put the bejesus back in people. I want to put the Jesus gospel message back
Amen.
in Revelation, because this was political satire that was being written. It was a way to say mean things about those who were in charge politically and who could behead you if you use their names out loud. Suck it, people who use Revelations to say mean things. Well, I'm actually censoring a lot of worse language, so just know that I'm doing a good job censoring right now.
Good job, Pastor. Well done. So
I worked with the homeless for 14 years. Can you tell? Oh. Okay, no, go ahead. I'll say this later. No, go ahead.
Hold on to it. I
can't. I don't know.
So again, this is kind of like our conversation earlier about Daniel, that you need to know what kind of literature you're reading. This is not foretelling of the future, Book of Revelation. It was never intended to be that way. The author of the book did not intend it that way. The author of the book intended it more along the lines of, let's think of what the modern equivalent, and it's not going to be exactly the modern equivalent. So if you are a biblical scholar out there and you want to be angry at me, what I'm going to say, I'm totally like, I'm
yeah, and if this is the first moment in Bible study that doesn't suck, that you get mad at one of us, then God bless you, you've had cotton in your ears.
So I'm going to pitch a low and slow right over the home plate for you. The Book of Revelation is like the Onion articles.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's like
they have a piece
articles.
Of kernel of truth in them, and that's why they're funny.
Exactly. And they point something out that's really powerful, and really like it'll punch you in the gut if you so whenever, I don't know if you've noticed, but whenever there is a school shooting now, the Onion is running the same article. And they're just changing the details so that the town is correct and the number of dead are correct. But it's something like, no way to have stopped this, says country with least gun laws in the world, or something like that. And they have been running this article for like the last 4 or 5 school shootings. And it's the same, like the power of that statement is really pretty impressive. So the Book of Revelation was written to make that kind of statement at a time when the governing people, when the people in charge were killing lots and lots and lots of Christians. So it is, again, this kind of apocalyptic literature, this literature that is written to a highly oppressed people who are dying rapidly, to hear the promise of God that God is not going to let this be the end. So it is not about producing fear and making people believe that they are going to be abandoned by their God in a time of horrible trial. That is not the point of the Book of Revelation.
This reminds me of a website that used to be one of my favorites, but is no longer in production. It's called Lutheran True Confessions. And it was written by a friend of mine who's a part of the LGBT fight for inclusion in the church. And for those of you who don't know the history, the brief story is, for 20 years, gay and lesbian pastors weren't allowed to serve openly in the church. And we were victorious. So in 2009, the rules changed, which is, I think the message is like the Kirk Cameron movies that are out there that say, follow these rules or God can't love you. Our revenge is time, right? And is in the success of our movement, right? And today is the ninth 9-year anniversary of my ordination service. And my service was done in disobedience, breaking that rule that says that you're not allowed to exist in the church as a pastor. And 4 congregations got together and called me. And Lutheran True Confessions was like, it was the onion of the like LGBT kind of movement, and used to print very hilarious articles about like if someone gave me free tickets to Legally Blonde the musical, would publish things about how I had gone and how funny it was that I went to Legally Blonde the musical. Jeff Johnson. But one day, here's how this relates to this, is one day Lutheran True Confessions wrote a story that the bishop of the Upper Great Lakes Synod in the ELCA had put a pastor on trial because they were transgender. And I read the letter from the bishop, and I was so pissed off that I emailed stupid Jeff Johnson again. And Mari Irving, another pioneer in this movement, got really pissed off, and she emailed Jeff Johnson, and she included me on the email, and I was like, we've got to do something. This is horrible. Have you heard what's happening in the Lower Great Lakes Synod? I can't. And Jeff Johnson emails back with one sentence that said, guys, did you read the name of the bishop out loud? The name of the bishop was Wally No Effing Way of the Lower Great Lakes Synod, which does not exist.
Doesn't exist.
Bennett Falk, writer of the Lutheran True Confessions. And so it was like that Onion article, but of Lutheran stuff. You can go back and read it. All the archives are there, but you might not know what's satirical, what's not true, and what is true. Like, I did go to Legally Blonde the musical, and it was good. Jeff Johnson. Bennett is a member of Jeff's congregation, so Jeff would often plant stories. The end. But so that's just my way of saying that things that we might start in conflict, we might start writing this allegory, and we have no idea if the thing that the guy who wrote this text, we don't know who it was. We don't know if the thing he was pissed off about was resolved within his lifetime. Like, he might have passed the letter around, and then a few years later, that thing got taken care of. Like, people were like, oh yeah, you're right, that's really dumb. So that, like, for example, the 95 Theses that Martin Luther wrote, where he was really pissed off, and then the whole Reformation happens and we split from the Catholic Church. If you go back and read those lists of things, all 95 things have now been fixed by the Catholic Church. We found other things to be mad about, and we have letters back and forth that we love each other and we're nice, and someday we can imagine reuniting. But it ain't going to happen because we've got all of these highfalutin ways that we live in the world. So just think of the book of Revelation as a letter that really wants real change to happen, but not one that says, follow my rules, or Kirk Cameron will be mad.
I don't know why I keep laughing when you say
Jeff
that.
Johnson. That's really fun to say too. I love Jeff Johnson, by the way. That's why it's fun to say Jeff Johnson. Ugh.
So the other piece of this Revelation passage that was lifted up on the podcast that was actually really interesting, and I'm going to run with this when I do, I think, at least as I continue my study on the work for this week, is verse 1:4. You have grace to you and peace from God who is, and who was, and who is to come. And the choice of the order of that, so it's not God who was, who is, and is to come, but this affirmation of God who is, and who was, and who is to come, is kind of a cool juxtaposition. And it can, since we're going into John as our gospel, you can start to lay that up against the prologue of the Gospel of John. And in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and all those kinds of pieces. So, which also parallels into some of the stuff that Jesus is saying in this gospel reading. So, just a little tidbit there that's kind of interesting. Do you think about God as, and even Jesus as being the God who is, and the God who was, and the God who is to come? kind of playing with a little bit of time and stuff, and considering all the Doctor Who imagery that's running through my mind right now, because of some comments that we've been making, it's kind of fun stuff.
I'm just thinking about building my nativity and what colors I will paint people and how to make their faces look, and all of that kind of comes into play too. Is what does your imagination of Jesus look like? And there are, where did I put the book I was going to show you? Boom! 1,000,000, 100 trillion different images of what Jesus could look like, whether he was a regular dude or a really Jewish looking dude. That's a funny one about virgins who don't behave, right? So there's lots of different, like anything crazy we could come up with in Bible study that doesn't suck has probably appeared in some sort of giant painting that is hanging in a museum somewhere. And I also want to show you my little cross collection real quick before we jump too deep into the anti-Semitic John text. How do I feel about that? I don't know. Because it is Reign of Christ Sunday, and we can have lots of different understandings of what the cross means. So bloody, 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 or king, or Lord of the world could be your image, or it could be a woman with flowers. And yay, the cross is really about Mary. I love Mexican theology. It's really awesome. This is from South Dakota. Yep, that's a stirrup. A stirrup with wheat, right? Because Jesus is a cowboy. That's a good one. This is also from South Dakota. It's the Native American talking stick, because the cross makes us not talk over each other. Or the cross with the stars are symbols of hope. So in the Christmas story, you can remember that part. And hearts. So these are people who are like, oh, we don't like the bloody, bloody Jesus thing. How about it's about love? So that's a good one. That's a good Hallmark ending movie. This one, you're gonna, Amanda, you should swallow whatever liquid you just took a drink of. This one is from the Holy Land Experience in Orlando, Florida, where they dress up in Jesus outfits. And it's the cross is a sword. Follow my rules or Kirk Cameron will get you. Reign of Christ. This is what most people think the reign of Christ is. What are you holding up, Amanda?
Banana. Banana.
That's totally Jesus. This one is also from Mexico because they have my favorite ones. This is the life and flowers and vegetation blooming from the cross. Pressed flowers, Mary. Guess where it's from? Because it's one of my favorites. Tanzania. Tanzania doesn't have bloody, bloody Jesus crosses. They understand genocide and bloody, bloody, bloody. So they have the hands of the community coming together with the Holy Spirit in the middle, because reconciling and recovering from all of that bloody, bloody, bloody is what Jesus is up to in the world. More Marys. This little light of mine. Jesus is really fun and family friendly. You can take your kids to watch the cross, which would be creepy if you thought it was bloody, 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 bloody. Right? And here's the image from the book of Revelations, the lion and the lamb lying down together, because there is no more need for a war. Bronze pipe. You could do some damage with this. But this idea that Jesus and the cross are fashion forward. That's right. You can hang it in your house and it's fancy looking. This is from the ELCA. Peace, right? God is bringing peace. This one also is a swallow your juice before you see it. Hot pink Jesus in Rio de Janeiro. Mm-hmm. And this one's one of my favorites. Just that it's about the body. That it's about the body. And our bodies and taking care of our bodies. So know that there are lots of different types of images for the cross, even though the reign of Christ, bloody, 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 Son of Jesus, Lord, Sunday doesn't necessarily capture it. That's my new hymn I've written for this Sunday. No, I'm just kidding. I did actually go once to when I was on street retreat, living on the streets with the homeless for a week. One of the times that I did that, there was a place where you can go and get food, but you have to go to the church service beforehand. And they literally had a hymn that I just call the Bloody, Bloody, Bloody hymn. And it was telling people with addiction issues and who are in a very vulnerable, hopeless situation with addiction recovery or whatever is going on in their life. And before they could have their salmon dinner and red velvet cake, they had to sing, "The blood on his hands, the blood on his feet, show me that he loves me. If only I'd followed all of his rules, then God would not have died to save me. The blood on his hands, the blood on his feet." Bleh! I didn't actually throw up, but I was with a nun and she was very, very frustrated. She was Franciscan. It was the worst hymn I've ever sung.
I'm not in my office, so I don't have any of my crosses. I have a minion. Banana. Banana.
Hi, Minion. How you doing? I just wanted to let you know that the whole end of the world thing's not really as scary as everyone thinks. So I've got my pink robe on. Can you help me tell people that my reign doesn't mean slaughter, 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 please?
It means everybody's gonna have bananas. Okay, we're going a little
Unless
bit far.
they're intolerant, and then they can have gluten-free bananas.
Yes. So, but I would like to.
Said so.
I would like to give another option on the reign of Christ. Not that, I mean, I don't love this Theology Sunday. I think it's very hard because it gets so tied into Bloody Bloody and into those kinds of pieces. And there is comfort in God being the one at the end. If you believe in God as being, if you believe that God is a generous, loving God who forgives and all of those pieces, which I do, and which the Lutheran Church does, then the idea that this generous, loving, benevolent God who keeps trying to help us even though we keep screwing it up, if you hold that God as your God, then the idea that God at the end of the day is the one in charge of everything is comforting. So just going to put that out there. So
blood on his hands.
Stop it. Stop it.
Everyone in my congregation is having cancer scares, and so it's not a good week for Bloody Bloody Jesus.
So let's look at the John quickly.
John!
And
John's anti-Semitic.
Yes.
Be careful whenever he talks about Jewish people.
Yes, you can go there. And this is a really interesting passage. Because it's really fun to see how Jesus does wordplay and like how he like, so people who do like, what would Jesus do? Jesus would ask a question. Like that's the thing. Jesus would respond with a question.
Depending upon how you read it, Jesus is either a big jerk face or passive aggressive. Right?
Or clever.
But you can't tell because we can't see if there are patches on his elbows of his robe and a pipe in his mouth when he says it. That's because that's what you look like when you're clever on TV.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Like a professor. Yeah.
Like a professor. Okay. Yeah. Well, chances are since he's in the middle of the trial with Pilate, there's no sweater.
All right.
No sweater. But it's a conversation between Pilate and Jesus, and Pilate is someone who has been put in charge by the occupying government.
Whose title is what?
What, Pontius Pilate's title? I don't remember at this moment.
Oh, okay.
I have to look it back up again.
Fancy
it's something
guy.
I need to look up.
Curate, something fancy guy.
Yeah,
so it's Herod who's the actual title is the King of the Jews, right?
Well, Herod is the ruler of the Jewish people in that area. Pilate is the Roman government's governor of the area. So the individual peoples, the individual tribes and those kinds of things were allowed to have their own ruler, but they had to abide by Roman law. And so they had their own courts, like the tribes and the different groups would have their own courts, but at the end of the day, they had to run it by Rome as the occupying force. So If there is, I don't want to get into too many politics, so let's take it into Dr. Seuss land or something like that. So if here we have this cat, and this cat's land is occupied by the minions, right?
Oh,
If
I think it should be the other way around.
other way around, okay.
Cats dominate, minions just eat bananas.
Okay, so the minions have their fabulous world, and they're doing their thing, and then this world comes in and goes, I own you, right? So now
sit on you.
These people have now, they're going to designate this particular cat as the local ruler. So when the minions have problems around with each other, they can solve the problems between themselves still. Like, really, frankly, I don't want to have to do more than I have to do. That's what the cat people say. So the minions take care of little squabbles between themselves. But when things get really serious, then they send them on up to the cats. And then the cats do judgment, right?
And it's an apt metaphor because the minions can cause the problems.
Yeah, the minions cause their own problems. They do their own things, right? Yeah. And sometimes they can solve it between themselves, and they have the authority to do so. But when there's big things going on, then it goes up to the cat people, and then they have to do something. So Pilate is the one who was designated by the cat people to be the local ruler. And the problem that Pilate is facing right now is that the minions are all ganging up and really want this one guy to die. But Pilate doesn't think he's guilty of anything and doesn't want to kill him. But if he doesn't kill him, then the minions are going to get really angry and might try to like cause a whole bunch of big problems and like revolt, because minions are like that and they get their leaders killed, right? If you know the stories of any of the Despicables, that's what happens, is their person gets killed a lot. But if Pilate doesn't keep the peace, then I don't want hooves to be that. Then the birds who actually are up this way, who sent the cat person, who sent Pilate, then they're going to totally kill Pilate. So he's in this really fabulously tricky and confusing and rough spot, trying to figure out what to do. And his wife, frankly, tells him not to kill Jesus and to stay away from him because things are not necessarily good to hurt Jesus. But Pilate's just in this really hard, awkward position and is politically trapped. Not that Pilate's the victim. Please don't hear that. Pilate's not the victim, but he's
not as dumb as Peter the disciple.
He's totally trapped, and he's trying to find his way through this, and he's trying to figure out how to do this when he sees an innocent person in front of him, and yet still stop the occupying forces from coming in and killing him or killing others. So,
and Jesus is like the troll at the end of the bridge. He's always got a riddle for you.
Yeah.
That's what I think. So he's not helping. He's not helping his own case. If he wanted to not die, he's not helping.
Not at all.
And
in the Gospel of John, he's a little bit he's very human and he's not human, right? In the Gospel of John, like he's not as scared. Like in other Gospels, I experience him as more human, and the fear side and being on trial kind of stuff is kind of scary. But in the Gospel of John and being on the cross is kind of seems more painful to me in those Gospels. In the Gospel of John, which is a very different style gospel and was written later than the others,
it's like a riddle gospel.
It's almost like, well, we know that he needed to do this, so check this off and we check this off and we check this off, and here's this and here's that. So there's less of the, my God, why have you forsaken me? And more of the, I'm thirsty. Okay, now that's done. And mother, here's your son, here's your mother. Y'all get along. Great. Okay, reconciled. Good. Moving on. Okay, next thing. I need to take my last breath. So here we go. Right? So like, it's a different style of seeing this. And so it really, when you see this trial by Pilate in the Gospel of John, it's this flip where Pilate should be the one in charge and Jesus should be the one. And it's a total flip where Jesus is the one totally
Jesus
in charge of this trial.
Yeah,
Totally
Pilate's
in
like,
charge.
why don't you tell me what you did wrong? And Jesus is like, nah.
Right? You're a king, right? Well, you say that I'm a king. I don't know. Am I? Well, I don't know. Are you?
Nanner
You say
poo poo
so.
nanner.
Like, it's a really, it just flips the power dynamic.
Right. Which that spectrum that Amanda was talking about of how human Jesus is and how godly Jesus is, we think Jesus has a little mixture of both, but what percentages of the mixture has been up for debate since the beginning of Christianity. And so I would say Mark is on the far end over here on the Jesus is pretty human, like super duper human. And then John is on the far end of Jesus is super, super spiritual. And then you can find in between Matthew and Luke and find different pieces of where Jesus is human and where Jesus is spiritual, which again is just another reminder of you can find the gospel that is your favorite and read that one. You can have each of the gospels be like sprinkles on your ice cream that are all different colors, right? You can be like, I love this story in John when, I don't know, I like the he is she and me is he and we are he together part because that inspires my community feeling. And I like this story of the washing of the feet of the lady in this other story. And I like when there's a lot of poor people in Luke's gospel. And so you can, like the nativity that we'll be seeing soon, where it takes a sentence from Luke and a sentence from Matthew and a sentence from Luke and a sentence from Matthew and stitches them all together into a nativity play. You can also do that kind of stitching if you would like. And the hope is that you will continuously engage with all of these biblical readings so that you never feel like you have all the answers and you never feel so certain that the rules you like the best are the rules that God likes the best, because then you won't be a jerk to other people in the way that Kirk Cameron movies are. I just really like making fun of Kirk Cameron today, I think.
Apparently. So I think that we have said the things that we can say this week.
We did. We said a lot of
folks
things.
For sticking around and hanging out with us, and hope you have a good week and lots
Don't
of
suck.
prayers for our world.
Or suck less. Whatever
Yeah,
happened.
suck less.
Suck less. Okay, bye.
Bye, folks.